Thank you very much. And thank you to those of you that are joining this live. As was mentioned, we'll be recording it and sharing it out with those that weren't able to join us live. So welcome to all of you as well. I'm excited to be here with you today and to be able to talk you through our new and actually this month being introduced Safe Sport protocol for event organizers. The purpose of this webinar is for us to make sure that you have all the resources and information necessary to be able to execute against it. And to make sure that we're able to help you in that space. So as was mentioned, there'll be an opportunity for questions. Feel free to put them in the Q&A. We'll also have a chance at the end where you can ask them to me directly. So as things come up, just jot them down and we'll make sure that we get to as many questions as we possibly can. So as we jump in, the first thing I want to say is what are our goals for today? Or really, what are our goals when it comes to the Safe Sport protocol? And ultimately, our goal is that we want to set the standard for athlete safety in cycling. And we as USA Cycling, we want to set the bar for what it means to create a safe space for everyone that participates in cycling. We also want to embed our Safe Sport program in everything that we do, whether it's a webinar, whether it's a race, whether it's a trip, everything that we do should be underpinned by our Safe Sport program. And ultimately at our events, we want to provide a noticeably different event experience for everyone that's at that event. That means racers, that means race officials, race directors, observers, fans. We want them to notice that there's something different about our events. And that should be both the look and feel. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today in this webinar is some things that we are going to be providing to you moving forward to help with both the look and feel of your USA Cycling sanctioned event. So this is ultimately the goal of what we're doing. But to achieve this, we recognize that we have to provide you with the necessary knowledge and tools. We can't do this alone at events. We sanction thousands of events and we're not at all of them. And you can't do it alone. You need to be provided with critical resources. And so that's one of the things that we are committing to do for you moving forward. What we're going to talk about specifically today is we're going to begin with a little bit of background and education around just the Safe Sport program in general. If we're going to ask you to be enforcing this and following this at your events, it's pretty important that you understand what we're even talking about in the first place. So that's step one. Then we're going to talk about expectations. So what does this look like on the ground at a USA Cycling sanctioned event? What are the expectations of you as an event organizer or host or official or whatever your role may be? And then ultimately, what are the resources that we're going to be providing to you to help you live up to those expectations? Both what do we have now and then what might come down the line. So that's what we're going to be talking about today during this webinar. So if we start with a little bit of background, hopefully the concept of Safe Sport is not new to any of you, but it may be, and some of you will certainly be more familiar with it than others. The U.S. Center for Safe Sport was empowered by U.S. Congress in 2017 with an act that passed in 2018 to have authority over creating education and training around misconduct in sport, as well as to create policies around misconduct in sport. The U.S. Center for Safe Sport sits above the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee sits over every national governing body in the U.S. Olympic movement, of which cycling is one. So this is something that's much bigger than USA Cycling. It reaches across the entire Olympic movement, and we all follow the same code that you see here. So this is the code that was issued by the U.S. Center for Safe Sport that outlines which behaviors are considered misconduct and are therefore prohibited in the Olympic movement. And this is available to you online on our website, as well as the center's website. So I would encourage you to check it out and make sure that you're familiar with it. Now, within the Safe Sport Code, you'll find each of the categories of behavior that you see here. So each of these is a type of behavior that has been identified as prohibited within the Olympic movement. And if you go to the code and you look into these, you'll see that there's descriptions, providing kind of context around them, what would meet the threshold of being a violation of one of these. And there's everything from, physical and sexual misconduct to violations of the minor athlete abuse prevention policies, as well as retaliation or any sort of interference with the reporting or investigative process that could be considered violations of the code. And so it's important that you are aware of what is in this code and have an understanding of what the expectations are surrounding adherence to this code. Now, a really important question to ask is like, okay, great. So we have this safe sport code, USA Cycling follows it, like who actually has to follow it? Who's actually bound by it? And every national governing body was asked to essentially define for themselves who they consider a capital P participant. And capital P participants are bound by the code. So for us at USA Cycling, it's anyone that meets any one or more of the criteria that you see here. And you'll notice that the one that's highlighted is highlighted because it's the most common. Any license holder with USA Cycling is bound by the code. It's not just officials, race directors, employees at USAC. It's every racer at your event is bound by the code. Whether they have a one-day license or a year-long license, they're bound by the code in the same way. The only difference being that if they have a one-day license, they're bound for the day that they have the license. If they have a year-long license, they're bound for that year. So this is a really critical piece because this is how we determine if we have jurisdiction over somebody. We go and look and see, does the person meet one or more of these criteria, or did they at the time of the alleged misconduct? And if the answer is yes, then we have jurisdiction and we can potentially move forward and hold them accountable for their behaviors. So important for you to be aware of this, and notice that volunteers are bound by the code as well. So volunteers that you have helping you work your events, they are bound by the code. And so that's where this communication piece becomes so important, is we want to make sure that people know what's expected of them. And that's part of what the event organizers' responsibilities include. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further on in this presentation. So this is who we consider at USA Cycling a participant, and you are therefore bound by the code if you meet one or more of these criteria. Now, the Safe Sport Code is just one piece of our broader Safe Sport program. So at USA Cycling, our Safe Sport program consists of everything that you see on this slide. So it includes our minor athlete abuse prevention policies, which we'll talk about a little bit more in depth in a second. Our prohibited conduct policy, which includes all the behaviors that you saw on that previous slide of the things that are listed in the Safe Sport Code. Our reporting, response, and resolution policy outlines the process we follow when we receive allegations of misconduct. And we'll talk about that in a bit more depth. Our Safe Sport education policy specifies who must have safe sport training. The general rule of thumb is any adult participants, so anyone 18 and over that has regular contact with a minor athlete, which is anyone under the age of 18, and then anyone that is in a position of power over a minor athlete is required to do safe sport training. We have certain categories of individuals, for example, coaches or officials that are required to have safe sport training, but we would encourage every adult participant to do safe sport training because the information is important for you as you are bound by that code. Our background check policy specifies who has to have a background check. And our policy 3, administrative grievances, outlines the appeals process that somebody can follow if they receive a discipline. So I want to just go a little bit more into this reporting, response, and resolution policy, because I think it's important that you understand what we do when we receive allegations at USA Cycling. First of all, the center has exclusive jurisdiction over sexual misconduct. So any allegations of sexual misconduct should be reported directly to the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. If they're reported to USA Cycling, we ultimately turn around and report them to the center. So the quickest option is go straight to the center. The center has discretionary jurisdiction over all other forms of misconduct. And so what that generally means is that they will decline jurisdiction and leave it to the NGB, so to us, to investigate. At USA Cycling, when we receive allegations other than sexual misconduct, the first thing I do is check to see, does the person being reported meet the definition of a participant? And if the answer is yes, they meet one or more of those 10 criteria, then we have jurisdiction and we can move forward. So the first thing I do after that is gather more information from whoever is reported, if I can, and then I compare the information gathered to our various policies. And if it seems likely a violation has occurred, we actually hire an independent investigator to do the investigation. So we don't do our own investigations. We hire somebody outside of the organization, and that prohibits or eliminates any possibility of perceived or actual conflicts of interest. And during that investigative process, everyone has a chance to be heard. And that's a really important thing to note, because oftentimes people assume that they're scared to report because they aren't totally sure something happened, and they assume that if they report it, we're just going to immediately take action against that person and punish them without knowing for sure if the thing happened. Now, if something that has been reported that's so egregious that if it's true, we worry about the imminent safety of someone, we can put in a temporary suspension. But that person will still ultimately have a chance to be heard. So that's an important thing to note. During that investigative process, everyone has a chance to be heard. So the person that's being reported will be interviewed. The person that was reported will be interviewed. Anybody with any additional information will be interviewed. And then at the end of that, we get a report back that basically says, based on the information gathered, a violation, it's most likely a violation has occurred, or based on the information gathered, it's more likely a violation hasn't occurred. And then we take action based on that. The action we take could be anything from issuing an administrative hold or closure, we're not, going any further, to potentially suspending somebody from USA Cycling for life. Now, importantly, if we suspend somebody for USA Cycling, first of all, they're not just suspended they go on our website. So we have a forward-facing web page that shows everyone that is currently suspended from USA Cycling. But also, they're not just suspended from USA Cycling, they're suspended across the entire Olympic movement, and vice versa. So if someone has been suspended from a different NGB, we are also actively preventing them from participating with USA Cycling. And the way that we do that is every other week, I download a list from the center of their centralized database, which includes everyone suspended across the Olympic movement, and we upload that against our membership. And if there's a name match, I get notified and I go in and verify it's not the same person. Or when someone joins USA Cycling, their name's getting checked, and I'll get notified if there's a name match, and again, go in and verify it's not the same person. Now, this also happens for those of you that use BikeReg to register for your events. BikeReg is set up with an API to our membership, which means anyone that registers for your event through BikeReg is also being checked against this list, which is a requirement for our events. So that's a great resource that we now have set up through BikeReg to make this an automatic process for anyone that registers. Now, importantly, I've been working at USA Cycling for almost 5 years. And in the 5 years that I've been working here, the list of individuals that we are actively preventing from participating in our events has never been less than 2,000 people. Right now, it's hovering around 2,900 people any given day. So what that means for you as an event organizer is that during your event, you are actively preventing almost 3,000 people from participating in your event because they've been deemed unfit to be a part of the Olympic movement. And that's a huge value add to our events. When we say they can't participate, that means they can't play any role beyond that of a spectator. And at times, we're able to even prevent them from being a spectator, depending on the type of venue that you have. So this is something that you should be screaming from the rooftops and promoting as a reason for people to participate in your event. You have the ability and you have access to the resources, and we'll talk about those in a bit more depth later on in the presentation, but you have means to actively stop people from participating in your events because they've been identified and deemed through due process to be unfit to participate in your events. And that's something that we want to use more and more to draw people to our events as something that makes them feel attracted to being a part of a USA Cycling sanctioned event. Again, that number of nearly 3,000 is across the Olympic movement. So just want to emphasize that. That's not specifically people that have been banned at USA Cycling. That's USA Cycling plus all the other NGBs. But it's a huge value add for us. Now, another really important thing for you to recognize and know is that you as an adult participant of USA Cycling are a mandated reporter. And what that means is you must report suspected or known violations of the Safe Sport Code or MAP or of our policies through the official channels. So that means sexual misconduct must be reported to the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. If it involves child abuse or child sexual abuse, it must also be reported to local law enforcement. And then any other forms of misconduct can be reported directly to USA Cycling. As a mandated reporter, something to note is that if 5 of you witness or know about the same behavior, all 5 of you have to report that. It's not enough for one of you to report on behalf of the 5. Each of you are a mandated reporter, and therefore each of you must report that behavior to meet that expectation of you as a mandated reporter. So please keep that in mind. I cannot tell you the number of times that I've had someone call me and be angry that we haven't taken action on something. And when I tell them, like, this is the first I'm hearing of it, they'll be like, oh, no, so-and-so said that they were going to report it. So I call so-and-so, lo and behold, says, oh, no, I didn't report it. I thought the other person was reporting it. Those are not, you're not meeting your requirements as a mandated reporter in that situation. And you cannot assume that someone else is going to report it. Both of you, all of you must report it. Meet that expectation as a mandated reporter. Now, one of the things that we're really working on and focusing on in 2024 is making sure that there are as few barriers to reporting as possible. We want to get the information out to every person at every event for them to be able to report seamlessly and quickly if and when they suspect or know of violations of our policies. So what you see here is one of the resources that we are going to be providing to you as event organizers moving forward for you to place all over your events. If somebody were to walk by this, they could very quickly pull up the QR code and make the report they need to make. If they were to, if they pulled up the QR code for the center, or let's say you pulled up the QR code for the center, it's going to take you to this web page. And you'll see here that you can report to the center either online or by telephone. Either is fine. I prefer to do it online because I find that it's faster. And then it also means I have a paper trail of having made that report. So for me, that's a better option, but you can go either way. And then remember, if the allegations involve child abuse or child sexual abuse, that also needs to be reported to local law enforcement. And so you would report that to the local state or county or city, whatever information you have of where that victim is. So that would be meeting your requirement as a mandated reporter for sexual misconduct. If you're reporting a different form of misconduct and you pulled up the USA Cycling QR code, this is the webpage you would land on. And you'll see that there's multiple ways to report to USA Cycling. We have a link that you can see at the top of the page in the box that I've created. This provides a way for you to report anonymously or confidentially. You can also report by email to the email that you see there, or you can call or text the phone number that you see there. All of those are official ways to report to USA Cycling. And I say official because when we say that you are a mandated reporter, that doesn't mean that you just say something to the other person running the event with you, or you say something to Trish, or you say something to the one USA Cycling person that you know about, or that you have contact details for. You've got to take it to the official channels. We don't want things to get lost in inboxes or lost in communication because they've not gone through the official channels. So please make sure that you are doing that if you're reporting something. Now, what we've talked about so far is the Safe Sport Code. And the Safe Sport Code applies to everyone, regardless of age. So whether you are 9 or 96, you're bound by the code and you can hold others accountable to it, assuming they meet the definition of participant. In addition to the Safe Sport Code, not as an alternative or as a substitute, but in addition, anytime we're interacting with anyone under the age of 18, which will be many of you for the events that you organize, you also have the minor athlete abuse prevention policies in effect. There's a number of kind of policies within the overarching minor athlete abuse prevention policies, but they all ultimately fall under this overarching one-on-one interactions policy, which states that any interaction, one-on-one interaction between an adult and a minor must be observable and interruptible by another adult. And when we say interaction, we're talking about both electronic and physical interactions. So when you are emailing with a minor athlete or texting a minor athlete or calling a minor athlete, there has to be another adult copied onto that communication. Now, that can be the parent or guardian. It could be someone else running the event with you. It could be a coach. It doesn't have to be a specific adult. They need to be alive, but it needs to be another adult participant. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind when you think about event communications. If you're sending a mass communication, that's fine as long as there's adults on that, if there's minors part of that. The other place that this is obviously in effect is in-person interactions. So if you are, let's say, at your event and there's minor athletes there, any interactions you're having with that minor must be in a space that is being observed by another adult, and they're close enough to interrupt it if anything were to be considered inappropriate. So this is a really important, both of these are very important and very pertinent to those of you that have events that involve minor athletes. And it's really important that you understand them, and then also think about at your unique event and your unique venue, where are those potential areas where there might be an opportunity for a one-on-one interaction, and how can you set it up to prevent that? So whether that's like a changing room or a bathroom, we're going to talk about what some of the options are there and what some of the requirements are, but just be mindful of their different venues, and different events are going to have different risk areas. And so you want to be thinking in advance of those, of like, where might those areas be and how can we protect against the possibility of one-on-one interactions happening between a minor and an athlete. Another thing to note here is this policy applies with regards to travel to and from events as well. So adults can't be driving minors one-on-one if they're not the parent or guardian, unless they have advanced consent. So a lot of information there, but ultimately the kind of golden rule here is no one-on-one interactions between an adult and a minor, electronically or physically, without another adult copied on or engaged. So that's a really quick background or kind of overview of our Safe Sport program and some of the key policies that sit within that. And that information ultimately leads us to where we are right now, which is, so what's new? What does this mean for us as event organizers who have sanctioned our events with USA Cycling? And so that's what we're going to spend the majority of today talking about, is what does this actually mean for us, and how do we meet our requirements of adhering to USA Cycling's policies. So what we're going to talk about now is our new features, which is number one, guidance for you on what do you need to do to be compliant with our policies, and then resources to allow you to be compliant. So the biggest, I would say, like the most significant resource that we've created is this guidance document. Obviously, this is just kind of a zoomed in screenshot of it, but this is now live on our website. It's available under resources on the event organizer webpage, and we'll obviously send out this information to you as well. But it's also going to be emailed to you when your event is permitted with USA Cycling. And what this is a packet that walks you through step by step how to ensure that your event is compliant with USA Cycling Safe Sport protocols. So this is just the first page. It kind of introduces it. And what we're going to do today is go through each page to make sure that you have an understanding of what it means and where to find more information, and make sure that you are compliant with it. So first of all, we've created this little infographic for you that hopefully helps you realize that although the packet's pretty thick, I believe it's 8 to 10 pages, and there's a lot of information in it, it all boils down to basically being able to check off that, yes, I've done each of these 8 things. The packet is very in-depth on purpose, because my hope is that, like, if I were to die tonight, you would be able to pick up that packet, follow it step by step, and be compliant without me being around. That's ultimately what the goal of this was, is like, I wanted there to be as much information as possible so that a random person who's sanctioning their event with USA Cycling for the first time, obviously we would prefer they don't have to rely solely on that document, but if for whatever reason they had to, they'd actually be able to achieve compliance purely from that document. So just keep that in mind as we go through it. If you're thinking like, oh my gosh, this is so much information, it isn't so much information on purpose so that you have a one-stop shop to make sure that you are compliant. But it really boils down to these 8 questions that we'll go through. And as long as you can check these off as yes, you've done them all, then you're good to go. So the Safe Sport protocol for sanctioned events and activities, as I mentioned, will now be sent to each event once permitted with USA Cycling. So you'll get it as an email attachment, but then also it'll live in our website where you can go view it, or it already does live on our website now, where you can view it and read it as a PDF. And this will be a resource for you to be able to reference at any time as you are operating within USA Cycling sanctioned events. The packet is broken down into 3 sections. The first is prior to the event. So what are the things that you need to consider and be prepared for and have completed prior to your actual event? Then it talks about at the event, and then it talks about post-event. So we'll start with prior to the event. What are the things that need to be done? There's a lot more depth in the document about this, or in the packet, but ultimately what needs to be done is you have to directly communicate with every participant. So that includes volunteers, medical personnel, riders, race officials, etc. Anybody that's a part of the event. You need to directly communicate to them no more than 30 days out, and no less than 1 day out, that the minor athlete abuse prevention policies are in effect, and you need to communicate how they can report concerns. Now, one thing that will be live, or that is live actually already, for those of you that register or do registration for your event through Bike Reg, is we've now added an automated email that gets sent through Bike Reg to anyone that has registered through Bike Reg. So if you are hosting your event or registering for your event through Bike Reg, this will be done for you. But bear in mind that email will only be sent to the people that have registered through Bike Reg. So if you have volunteers or someone else that is participating in your event but doesn't register through Bike Reg, you would need to manually send them an email and communicate to them. In this packet, there is an email I've written, or email content that I've written, that you can literally just copy and paste and send to your participants to meet this requirement. If you want to write it yourself, that's fine, but I've written it for you as a standard email so that you can send that out through whatever mechanisms you use for your event. Now, that being said, I also appreciate that not every event has the ability to send communications in advance. You don't always know everybody in advance. So we also have means for you to make this communication happen on the ground for those that might be joining day of. And the way to do that would be through having or having some of the resources that we've created at your event printed, let's say at the registration table, at the volunteer check-in table, and someone's going to point them to that document and say, hey, and I've written a script in this packet for you of literally what you would say. Again, you can change it a little if you want, but you could literally read it off there. And essentially you're saying, hey, glad you're here for the event. Want to make sure that you're aware that the MAP policies are in effect at this event, and that there are a number of different ways to report. And if you pull up this QR code, you can learn more about it. That would meet the requirement of communicating in advance that MAP policies are in effect and how to report. And so we've created signage that we will be providing to you that you'll be able to put in key places to make sure that anybody that wasn't able to register in advance, or that you weren't able to send this communication to in advance, is getting that information on the ground at your event. The other thing that needs to happen in front of the event is in advance of the event, is that you have to make sure that everyone has met their eligibility requirements. And what I mean by that is anyone that's required to do safe sport training. So that's any adult participant that has regular contact with a minor, or any adult participant with authority over a minor has completed their training. For USA Cycling, every coach license holder has safe sport and background, and every official has safe sport and bike background as a requirement of their license. On the ground at your event, there will probably not be many, if any, people that, in addition to that, that would be required to do safe sport training, because we wouldn't consider one event to be regular contact with the minor athlete. And we wouldn't consider, a volunteer or someone of that nature to have authority over a minor athlete in most situations. I really can't think of a role of a volunteer where they would be given authority. Now, one thing that could be an exception to this is, let's say you're running multiple events, or you have like a 10-day event, and you're going to have one person that's going to work across all the events, or that's going to work across all 10 days of the event. That changes things, because 10 days is different than one day. 10 races in a row is different than one race. And so now it's possible that we would say, a volunteer, let's say, I can't think off the top of my head of what their role would be, but somebody that is going to be interacting with minors throughout that 10 days and across that 10 days may then cross into that threshold of having regular contact. So if you're ever not sure about if somebody meets that requirement, you can always email me or our events team, and we can help clarify for you. But the document also outlines those that automatically meet this criteria based on the license type that they have with USA Cycling. So that information is in there, or in this packet. The other thing that needs to happen in advance is every participant needs to be checked against our disciplinary records. And so, as I mentioned, those of you that are using BikeReg for your registration, that check's automatically being done for anyone that registers through BikeReg. But again, there might be people that are participating in your event that are not registering through BikeReg. And so you would need to manually check those people against the disciplinary records. One area that we have to do that often, as I mentioned already, is like with any sort of medical personnel that are going to be there on site. I go and introduce myself, or I get a list of them in advance, and I'm checking them against our disciplinary records. Anybody that might be joining your event the day of that hasn't been checked in advance, you're checking them on the ground at the event. Our disciplinary records list is only about 25 people, so it's not real hard to more or less memorize it and be able to check that. You can also have a QR code, and this is in the packet, that pulls up our disciplinary records. And so you can simply be cross-referencing as you check somebody in, or as you're giving them a nameplate, et cetera. So there'll be probably most likely at your event a combination of both automatic checks as well as manual checks to ensure that participants are not on the disciplinary records. But this is a requirement of our event. And again, this is something that sets our events apart from any other cycling events. So if ever you have questions or you're not sure, you can always ask, but there's QR codes in the packet to the disciplinary records. There's a reminder of the way that BikeReg works with this. And then it talks about kind of all the various groups of people that you need to be making sure that you're checking against those disciplinary records. And one thing to note here is that the disciplinary records on our website are live. So it's not enough to just check everybody 30 days out from the event, even if your registration has closed, because somebody could be added or removed to the list between 30 days out and the day of the event. So you need to be checking that on a regular basis up into and including the day of your event to make sure that there haven't been any changes in compliance with regards to the people that you have at your event. Another part of this packet that we talk about, and this is something that we've introduced at our national championships, and so now we've added language around it for you, is if you are going to have a designated team space, like a tent space at your event, so a place where people can register in advance, and they're going to have that space that is unique to their team, there needs to be at least one person within that team that has safe sport training. And so the way that we have tried to accommodate for this is late last year, or even early this year, we introduced a new license type, which is team manager. The team manager license is for anyone that's kind of the point person on the ground at an event. So whether it's an adult only team or a team with minors, there needs to be at least one person in that group, and it needs to be the person that is meeting and picking up the tent space materials. That person at a minimum needs to have a team manager's license or equivalent. And the equivalent would be coach, official, or UCI technical license all meet the same requirement because all of those require safe sport training. Ultimately, the reason why this is different or why we have this extra level of safety for this group is because if you've got tent spaces or team spaces, it means people are hanging out there regularly. And so now we're going from just like a one-off interaction to regular contact. And there, if you're in a team, there should be at least one person that has training around safe sport anyways, because everyone on your team is bound by the safe sport code. And so it's pretty important that at least one of you, ideally all of you, are aware of what's actually in the code. So that's a new license type that we've introduced. It's a really low cost, but it's a way for us to make sure that at least one person within the team or within a club, for example, has exposure and knowledge of safe sport training. So that's one that you can now purchase online, and there's more information about that in this packet. If we transition now from what needs to happen prior to the event to what needs to happen at the event, obviously you've got everything from before. So checking for safe sport training for those where it's relevant, checking everyone against the disciplinary records, getting the communication about MAP and how to report out. All that's happening. And then at the event itself, while it's happening, one of the things we really want to work on is making sure that we have signage in highly trafficked areas. Like I said, we want to really work, and we're making a commitment to making sure that our events look and feel different than other events. And signage around safe sport and our policies is a key part of that. That makes our events look different. More importantly, it ensures that people have the ability to actively engage in our programs and report any suspected or known misconduct so that we can take swift action against it. Another thing that you need to think about at the events is credentialing in designated areas. Any area that provides exclusive access to athletes is considered a designated area. So what that could look different at different events, but it would be like, let's say if somebody gets to do a pre-course or like a course ride pre-event, that's special access to a designated area where athletes are doing their course pre-race course rides. And that person that's accompanying them, let's say it's a coach, they're getting special access to a space that is designated for athletes. And so we need to then check that person against disciplinary records. And the easiest way to do that is to create some sort of credentialing system. When that person comes in to pick up their bike, their nameplate to go do that pre-course ride, we're checking that person against the disciplinary records. So we have some way that we're accounting for who's getting access to this designated area and ensuring that we've checked them against the records. Other areas that might be similar to this would be like, let's say if you have a track event and you've got the infield of that, if you're not allowing public access to that, it's only athletes or it's only certain people, that's a designated area. And so you need to make sure that anybody that is getting access to that area is checked against the disciplinary records. The pits at a cyclocross event would also be a designated area. Not everyone has access to those. And so therefore, anyone getting access needs to be checked against our disciplinary records. And it makes it really easy if you do that and then give them some sort of indication that they've been checked, like by a certain colored credential or maybe a certain sticker on their credential. There's a lot of a wristband. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it. But the more visible you can make it that they've been checked, the better and the easier for everyone involved. Another thing that needs to happen at the event, and I appreciate that this isn't relevant to every event, but where relevant, you need to specify which restrooms and potentially changing areas are designated for the event. And the reason I say specify the restroom is I can use the example for us, USA Cycling. We've hosted mountain bike nationals at Winter Park for a number of years. We don't shut down Winter Park. It's still completely accessible to the public. So we can't monitor every restroom that's available. We don't even know where they all are. So instead, what we do is we specify this is the restroom for the event. And then that becomes the restroom that we are monitoring. We're designating a certain area for changing. We don't want people changing in the middle of the course or all over, the velodrome. We're specifying like this is the area that is designated for changing. This is the restroom that's designated for using the restroom. And then we're able to monitor that. When I say monitor, that means that somebody is walking by that space, ideally on an hourly basis, to make sure that nothing's happening that shouldn't be happening. That doesn't mean that you have to crawl under every stall or over every door, but you're walking by and you're checking. An easy way to do this is just make sure everyone on your staff is aware. And every time they walk by, because most of us are walking laps at venues, you're walking by and you're jotting down on the monitoring sheet, which I'll show you in a second, the time and your name to indicate that that restroom or that changing area has been checked. If it's porta potties, which I know is true of a lot of events, you're putting signage on each end of the porta potties, you know, the first one and the last one, indicating that these bathrooms are being monitored and somebody's walking by them. Maybe it's the person that's responsible for making sure there's toilet paper. You know, just think practically, like what's the easiest way to achieve this? But ultimately what we're trying to achieve is ensuring that we have safe spaces. And then the reference to announcements here would be, ideally you're having announcers or anybody that's kind of doing like the pre-event talk or meetings, announcing that, hey, as a reminder, USA Cycling Safe Sport program's in effect, the MAP policies are in effect. And as you notice, we have signage all over. If you have questions, want to learn more, need to report something, please use those resources to make that happen. I've put a script in here, couple sentences that I would recommend that you use. But again, it just comes down to communication and exposure. The more we can talk about this, the more we can highlight our Safe Sport program. One, the more people are going to be able to engage with it. And two, the more people are going to recognize there's something different about your event compared to non-USA Cycling sanctioned events and something that draws them to it. So all of kind of ideas and ways to achieve this are all written in this packet. And again, you will have access to that. And here's an example of what these items are. So starting on the left, you'll see there's a sign that says the minor athlete abuse prevention policies are in effect at this event. This would be one of the resources that I would have at registration, that I'd have at volunteer check-in, and that I'd have stuck along the walls wherever possible, just to make people aware. And they can look at that QR code. The people that are doing registration, if they have people joining that day, they're able to say, hey, just so you know, the MAP policies are in effect at this event. Feel free to pull up this QR code and learn more. And then right next to it, you'd have this sign with how to report. And here's a resource that shows you how you can report any forms of misconduct. That would meet the requirement of giving that information to your participants. On the right side, we have monitoring sheets and a sign that can go on the restroom and the changing room. Obviously, not all of you are going to have a changing area. And so naturally, you won't use that sign. But if you do, you're going to use that. If you have restrooms or porta potties, you're going to stick this on those to designate that these are our event restrooms. Please use these. And then the monitoring sheet that you see behind them, you can place next to the changing room sign or the restroom sign, depending on if or which of those you have. And then every hour or so, somebody's just coming by and jotting down the time, their date, and any comments. Maybe there's no comments, that's fine. Maybe there is a concern, they're jotting that down. But all of the things that you see here, we are now going to have available on our website for you to download and print. We're also going to be shipping them to you when you register your event with us, so that you have a hard copy of each of these that you can post, obviously, but also make more copies of. And I would encourage you to do that so that you can get as much signage and visibility at your event as possible. The other piece of this packet relates to post-event. At the end of the event, as part of your post-event permitting response packet, you are going to be receiving this checklist. And in this checklist, you'll be checking off things like, did all adult participants receive direct written communication about the MAP and how, where to report concerns within 30 days of the event? And your options are yes, no, or don't know. Provide a comment, and then an example of who those people would be that should have got that communication. In the packet that we will be now sending to every event organizer in a hard copy by mail will be a copy of the document that you see here, one that's printed that you can fill out, but ultimately you're going to submit it to USA Cycling online as part of our post-event form. And so there'll be an online version of this, but we wanted to provide you with a hard copy so that if somebody else is maybe filling it in or is better able to answer the questions because maybe they were on the ground while you were in a different part of the event, they could fill this out for you, hand it to you, and then you could upload it online or replicate the answers online through that online form that we will be sending to you. So post-event, you're filling out this document, confirming that you were compliant or providing an explanation of why you were not, if that is the case. And that might just be simply because it wasn't relevant to you. Like, for example, you didn't have anybody that joined the day of the event. So you would just specify that. There's also the bottom box where it says, were you aware of any incidences of misconduct or policy violations at the event? Yes, no, don't know. And then if yes, you're obviously needing to report those as a mandatory reporter, but we want to make sure we have a record of that as well. So this is something that will be sent to you as a hard copy. It'll also be prompted to you in that post-event form in an electronic version, and that's ultimately what you will be submitting to us as USA Cycling. So we have on record that you were compliant with our event standards, and then we will have that, for you next year as you look to permit with us again. So like I said, this packet is broken into that pre-event, at event, post-event. And my goal is that you can follow it from start to finish. And by following it step by step, you would be fully compliant with our event. There's links throughout the packet to take you to the disciplinary records, to take you to our Safe Sport education policy, to take you to various things that are relevant to you. And our goal is that you can use this packet to ensure that you are following our protocols in every event that you are a part of. Like I said, we're going to be working on building resources for you kind of indefinitely. But what you have here is an example of ways that we have used this. This was an event that I was responsible for, our Madison National Championships. And these are some of the areas that I put up resources. So on the far left was a portable bathroom. And so I put a sign about like, here's the bathroom. And then there's the monitoring list next to it. I talked to the volunteers that were at the event and I said, hey, can you make sure somebody's walking by and checking this? And so they were going by, every time somebody was checking toilet paper or somebody was sweeping, they would go by, check, make sure everything was fine, write their name and the time to ensure they were compliant. The two on the picture, one from the left, that's a registration table. So you can see that there's the QR code for MAP, and then there's QR codes for how to report. That was a way that the people doing registration could make sure everybody got that information. The weird yellow one is the changing area. So that's the signage on there. And then you'll see that I just kind of stuck some random signs around the velodrome. Again, just because we want to provide as much information and kind of signpost people to our Safe Sport program and how to report as much as possible. These are obviously slightly different infographics than the ones that I just shared with you. These are outdated, but the ones that I shared with you on the slide before are the ones that are going to be getting shipped to you for you to use at your event. So really what this comes down to is that when implemented fully, USA Cycling Safe Sport program is a huge value add for events and for you as event organizers. And what we want to do, what our goal is, what my goal is that we can empower you to experience it in that way. If we are able to give you the education and the information accompanied with the resources and tools necessary to satisfy the Safe Sport protocol, then this should be ultimately something that you are promoting as a huge value to your event, something that sets your event apart from other events. And I fully recognize that we have a big role to play in helping you achieve that. You can't do this alone. We need to be there to support you in that. And that's what we're really committing to this year and moving forward. And one of the really practical ways that we're doing that is through this packet that will be shipped to you when you sanction with us, that will include one template of each of those signs that I shared with you, as well as that checklist to ensure that you are in compliance and have all the resources necessary to stay in compliance with the expectations of our sanctioned events. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I see that we've got a couple questions. And okay, the first one, and please, now that I've kind of stopped because I know that was a ton of information, feel free to add any questions that you might have to the chat. And obviously, if there's questions that you want to ask more directly or personally, I'm always available and you can contact me directly. The two questions that I see right now are one, how are volunteers bound by the code unless you have each volunteer sign something? That's a great question. Ultimately, what happens when the center reaches out to us to ask us if we have jurisdiction over someone, our website, public facing, says that volunteers are bound by our code and are participants of our code. And so therefore, that's what we send them as verification. A better way to do that would be, ideally, we would be getting them, well, as long as they sign our volunteer waiver, which is the next one, that is what brings them under our code. So there is a volunteer waiver. Your volunteers should be signing that. And that's where they are falling under USA Cycling Safe Sport programs. The question around, is the Safe Sport information integrated with the existing USAC waiver? I think that's meaning, is there information about the Safe Sport program in that waiver? Trish, I'm going to have to revert to you on that question.
No, we haven't updated the volunteer waiver in a number of years, so it might be something we should consider.
Okay, so great question. We can get that added in. Ultimately, as far as them falling under our jurisdiction, it would go back to the website where it says that. Obviously, we don't want to be holding people to policies without them knowing it. That's not really beneficial for anyone. And so, yeah, definitely a great call to get that on the volunteer waiver. One thing I would also suggest around volunteers is thinking about potentially having some sort of advanced registration for them that allows you to make those checks against the disciplinary records. There's a lot of different apps that you can use, and potentially you can also use Bike Reg for that. So that's something to be thinking about too, as we think about like, how can we minimize the amount of manual labor that we need to do, or like manual referencing, is the more we can use things like platforms like Bike Reg or things that allow us to gather information in advance, the easier this becomes for all of us. So volunteers is definitely one area to be thinking about that in particular. Oh, yep. Awesome, Marion. That's a great call on that. Another thing with the volunteers is also to be sending them the email. They need to get the email that says MAP is in effect and how to report. And so you can also think about kind of putting a bit more content in that. And I'm more than happy to add a little bit of content if that would be something that you all would like to have. Ultimately, I want us to be creating any sort of communications or resources that you might need. And you all are the one that are on the ground. And so you would be the ones that are best placed to let us know what would be helpful to you. So please let us know what would be helpful to you. Another question is, if Bike Reg identifies a registrant as an offender, will they be prevented from signing up to the event, and will the promoter be notified? The answer is yes. They will be prevented from being able to register. There isn't an automatic notification sent to you that I'm aware of, but generally what we've seen is that person that isn't able to register is going to contact you and say, hey, I tried to register. Why wasn't I able to? At that point, you can reach out to us. And then that's when I usually am able to say, here's why. And I will then follow up with that person to inform them. We have had situations where somebody that's banned from a different sport has tried to register for our event and been flagged for that. We've also had situations where others have made us aware of somebody that has tried to register for an event because that event didn't use Bike Reg. Oftentimes we find out by other people letting us know, like, hey, I saw this person was registered for this event. I know they're on the banned list. Like, you need to do something about that. So keep that in mind too, is like, sometimes you're going to get information that way. Anytime somebody tries to register for an event that is on the prohibited list, the center and us at USA Cycling need to be notified. And so then we will follow up with that person. One thing I didn't mention that's in the packet is also a little bit of information about what you can do if there's misconduct at your event, or if somebody tries to participate that is not eligible to participate. I would say we've never had a situation to date where we've told someone they're not eligible to participate and they refuse to leave. But there is some guidance as to things that you can do in that situation. Do you recommend no day of reg to be sure all participants are scanned by a bike reg and using bike reg for all volunteers for the same reason? I mean, I don't know if I would say I recommend it. It definitely makes things a little bit easier. And so for those of you, if you have that option, that's a good way to do it. Even if you're using bike reg, you should still be checking day of, because again, that is a live document. And so I would still double check everybody day of, and you've got that resource online to do that pretty quickly, which is a huge help. We did not have that a year ago, and so we would literally have to just like Control F, cross-reference Excel spreadsheets with names. We still do that sometimes, but yeah, I definitely advance registration just makes this whole process a lot easier, because I know by the time it's day of, you have a million other things going on. But even with advance, you still want to be checking day of, because that is a live document. Yeah, to Jason's point, he said the system should auto notify the promoter. That's definitely something that we can look into. I'm not sure if that is something Bike Reg is capable of, but we will definitely look into that, because that would be very useful. And then I will say, to that point of like notifying if somebody tries to attempt in-person registration, well, first of all, any in-person registration, you also need to be checking manually against that list. And so you may indeed be recognizing or identifying them through that process, at which point you would say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not able to register you. And here's the reason why. I see that your name is on the prohibited list. If you have any questions or you don't think that's right, you can contact USA Cycling or the US Center for Safe Sport. That would be the approach that you take on the ground at the event. So great questions and comments so far. Is there anything else that I can clarify, provide some insights for? Any other questions? All right, well, if anything comes up, like I said, you can contact me anytime. My email is there. Trish and Matt have my email, my phone number. I'm always available. And ultimately, my goal is to make this as easy and seamless as possible for you. And so, like I said before, if things come up and you realize like, hey, this would be super helpful, or this would be super helpful, or this is not so helpful, that feedback is super valuable to us. So, and especially to me, and I'd like to say we'd be able to take action on everything. The reality is we can't, most likely, for whether that's, resource constraint, budget constraint, technology constraint. We're doing the best we can with what we have right now, and we're working to get better resources and materials. But ultimately, like, this is a requirement of all of our events and of all Olympic events or events of NGBs. And so we need to be meeting that regardless of whether or not we have the ideal resources at the moment. But we will be continually looking to improve those. So you have my word on that. And please do help us in this, and help us help you make sure that you are compliant with these policies, and and even more importantly, are able to really sell this as a huge value add that brings people to your events. So thank you very much. And thank you for sanctioning with USA Cycling. And we look forward to partnering with you this year and beyond.